it's very much about us being able, as teachers, to be able to kind of, prepare for those challenges and to kind of see, what else can we do that we weren't able to do in the past. I think, and we were talking about this over lunch as well, because some of the challenges is that this is new literacy. A lot of this is new. You can't, of course, sometimes you sit there and I'll come and show this and people think, whoa, I didn't know you could do this and I didn't know you could do that. Because actually the world of information has expanded to a point where not everybody will know everything. Quite often I also come across people and I come across tools that I think, wow, I just didn't know that you could do that. So we have to kind of be in this position where we're ready to explore, we're ready to try new things, and it doesn't matter if it doesn't work. The other thing that does happen is, we talked about the age of change, we talked about how, the examples of, knowing what's wrong with you even before you go to the doctor, kind of doing our banking online and stuff like that. And so many other things that have kind of impacted our lives in a positive way that we can kind of do things, but it also has an impact negatively as well. Because that's part of innovation, and that's part of new things. So let me just kind of share this with you, right? In 2014, in the US Library of Congress, there was just over 13.5 million physical photos. So we're just going to concentrate on photos, not videos, not documents, nothing else, just photos. Okay? So in 2014, according to the statistics that were accurate for 2014, or January 2014, just over 13.5 million physical photos. That means you could go into the Library of Congress and walk into the archives and actually pick up and see physical photos. In 2014, this was also happened as well. You remember Flickr? Yeah? So suddenly, mobile phones had cameras that were of really good quality. They were good enough quality, people were taking photos. And we had the internet, that we were always connected. And because we were always connected, these photos could go up to the cloud. It was so easy that actually it was just a setting that you switched on and automatically your photos would go to the cloud. It was simple, it was reliable, and everybody was doing it. And suddenly, compared to the number of physical photos, this thing was way beyond that. It didn't stop there, it carried on. The next thing that happened was this. How many people are on Instagram? Okay? My mom's on Instagram. She heard me speak about Twitter. This has got nothing to do with this, but I'll just tell you because it's funny. So she got onto Twitter, which was really scary for me, and she called herself Abdul's mom. And she has material that I just wish she would never put on. Nothing horrendous has happened at the moment. It just made me nervous thinking about it. Anyway, Instagram is like, the numbers just went crazy. Now, if you think about it, this is what I find fascinating, my own interpretation. The office of kind of the US Congress and their archives, somebody must have said, we should gather photos and archive them. Because they were thinking about photos. So lots of photos were taken, places, times, streets, objects, monuments, all sorts, and they're archived. So somebody was thinking about photos, right? Then Flickr happened, and again somebody was thinking about photos. They were thinking, wouldn't it be great, instead of having archives, hey, we could just have it all in the cloud, and everybody would just have the app, they just take the picture, upload to Flickr, and it's in the cloud, and other people can see it, and isn't that amazing? Then Instagram came along, and Instagram was also thinking about photos. Videos came much later, but originally it was photos. And they thought, wouldn't it be great if we could do everything that Flickr does, but also you can tap it and like people's photos. Yeah? And everybody loves those hearts, right? How many likes have I got? It's like a nice feeling inside. Okay? And if you don't get likes, that's like a sinking feeling inside. It has an effect on you. And then there's comments, so you could actually connect with other humans. Someone that you don't know, and they put something there, and you think, oh, where is this place? Where did you eat this? You know, and where did you buy this from? And so on. So you could actually connect with people and speak to them. And that human connection thing is probably the most powerful thing. Whenever technology is used to bring humans together, that's a very powerful use of technology. So when things like FaceTime came in, it was like, wow, you can actually, I can see them. Okay? It was pretty amazing. So that human connection, that's why I think the voice feedback thing has a lot more depth to it. But that human connection becomes quite powerful. And Instagram was the first photo utility that was now allowing for that kind of communication, that you could speak to people or communicate with them, which was kind of pretty revolutionary, and it grew. The next thing that came out beat all of this stuff put together. But those guys weren't even thinking about photos. They were thinking about community and bringing people together. The side effect was photos. And the side effect of photos was so big that it basically put all this just shrunk. Does anybody know what that was? 2014. Yes, you do. Go on. Snapchat might be now, not in 2014. Facebook, yeah? It was Facebook. It was literally this thing where more photos than all this stuff put together. But the focus was not photos. These guys were not thinking, let's make something that's going to have lots of photos. Because actually community and people and their responses and how they behave can change all of that. Now, so this was amazing, and people were talking about kind of Facebook and going crazy behind it, and everybody was on Facebook, and you could find friends that you went to school with and see what they got up to. You could find friends that you didn't like when you were at school and see how well they've done. You could connect with family that you don't normally, would be very expensive to ring them and speak to them, and suddenly you feel like you're very connected to them, and so on. And lots of things happen. But with every new thing that happens, there are always problems. And with Facebook also, although there was this amazing stuff that was going on, there was also new problems that the world did not know how to deal with. Things like privacy, okay? Things like being kind of personal and all that kind of stuff, and all the stuff that we heard, Facebook being taken to court for and all that sort of stuff and so on. So this environment means that there needs to be a new kind of literacy as well. And again, the World Economic Forum has put out some research that they've done, and I think this is quite powerful. They've titled it DQ, Digital Intelligence. Okay, and you could type in World Economic Forum and DQ, and this stuff will come up. But this is a bit like IQ, intelligent quotient, and emotional intelligence, EQ. So DQ is around digital intelligence. And what's powerful about this is that it goes beyond what you would normally expect to see. So you normally expect to hear about digital safety, normally you expect to hear about digital security, but actually for me, this goes beyond. There is no such thing as the best app for science or mathematics or so on. It's the wrong question to ask. Because it will depend very much on how the teacher uses that tool. So you can have a tool that's fantastic, but if the learning design element has not been focused and not put in there, then really the tool will not be effective. So that's something to kind of bear in mind. I wanted to show you another app that I've been kind of using. I think some of these tools are now getting to that communication and creation piece. For a long time, there were a lot of apps, but they were just consumption. You just used it, played about with it for a bit, and then you put it away. Now, I think that there's two things happening. One is the quality of the tool is becoming really good, and it's really allowing students to be really kind of get a lot of excitement and a lot of fun out of it. But at the same time, you have the ability to create new things as well, in a way in which you could not create before. So I'm going to show you two more tools. One is this one. It's called Insight Heart. Let me see if I can show you this, right? I don't know if you've seen this one. But I'm not, of course, it's science and biology and all that kind of stuff and so on. But really, the reason why I'm showing you this is because it's the quality of what you're seeing, right? So if I now just tap on the heart, right, you can kind of see the quality on there. It's kind of better on the iPad screen because it's brighter. But anyway, nevertheless, you get to see what's what. You can rotate it around. You can see a bunch of different things here. I could get rid of the muscle and just see the arteries and the veins and the blood vessels and so on. But what gets really kind of interesting is as I get closer, it does open up, and I can kind of see inside, and I can see the different valves, I can see how the muscles are beating and so on. The other thing that I can also do is, that's like a normal, healthy human heart. If I put myocardial infarction on there, so this is a diseased heart now, right? And as I go closer, I can see like the muscle on the left-hand side is not working, the muscle on the right-hand side is working, it's beating. The blood cells on the right-hand side are kind of moving around a lot faster. The ones on the left are not, and so on. I can begin to kind of see these things. But where this app is becoming quite powerful is they are now working on something a little bit different. So because more people are wearing wearable technology on their wrists, and it measures their heart, so this will then behave the same as your heart. Yeah? So you can actually see, what your heart actually looks like in this way. And kind of mimic it. Obviously it's not going to be exactly the same, but it can get very close to what does that actually look like. And what does that feel like and so on, and where things might be wrong with people with heart murmurs and all that kind of stuff and so on. So that's pretty on iPhones or anything like that. It's only available on the iPad. And it's something that allows you to create and get students to create concepts and ideas. So this one's called AR Maker. And if I just open this up, so Maker is spelled M-A-K-R, not E. So if you type in AR Maker in App Store, you'll see this pop up. And if I hit start, you'll see I've got lots of different objects and different things appearing here. But we're going to do something, we're going to create our own. And if I just tap on creating your own scene, what happens is that it kind of creates this and gives me an area to work on like this. And on the left hand side, you can see lots of different objects scrolling through. All these objects you can make on iPad. You can make it in Keynote. Okay? But let me just try this and put a tree down. So I'm just going to make that a little bit big. Here we are. Right? And I'm going to place it there. So you'll see now this is an object that's fixed. You can see it's like an augmented reality kind of object. And I can put others down as well and make them smaller or bigger. And I'm just pinching to make it smaller or bigger. And I can place it in different places. Okay. And, I can make something lifelike if I want, kind of thing. But I won't do that because it's kind of going to be huge, right? And so on, I can put that there. I can also get other objects, and you'll see where I'm going with this in a moment. Get some more clouds, put those here, and so on. I think I've got a sun somewhere here. There it is. Pick it up. Okay. some arrows from the clouds. These are bigger, where I am. And if I just put some labels in. So where I'm going with this is I'm kind of creating the water cycle to a certain extent. Okay, I could have put other, water, and I could put other clouds and water evaporating and going up and so on. And basically what I'm doing is I'm creating a concept. So this is a skill, an idea that the students then have to build themselves. What's also really interesting is if I hide the object on the right hand side, I've got the camera button, and when I look at the camera button, I can record, and I could get this. The students can actually go in and say, well, these are the clouds, this is where the water's hold, and kind of actually take you through and record and create a video around this. And this is kind of quite fascinating in some ways. But again, I'm going to show you something. One of the things we talked about was kind of learning how to learn as teachers. But if I just go to YouTube, if I just go to this, and here in YouTube, if I just type in AR Maker, you'll see, and you could do this for lots of different things, right? So look at these guys. Well, we have to watch the video, do we? Right, so nearly finished. Okay, right here.
Yes, in this video we'll take a look at an app called AR Maker, NAER, by Lightbreak. This is
so it's kind of giving you a little video on how you use this and what you would make and so on. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that they're doing. But what you'll see,
story elements.
so they're kind of creating the story of the three little things, and they're doing it outside in the forest and so on. And you can create a whole kind of scene thing around this and be able to kind of tell your story and so on. And there are other people that have done some other things which have been kind of pretty amazing as well. So this is a guy called Paul Hamilton.
It's basically a brick wall, and it's been brought into AR Maker to give that impression of kind of bricks missing. What can I see on the other side of the wall? Enlarging the brick wall so it kind of gives that impression that it's kind of like a portal looking behind it. So we'll go through the step by step and actually how to do that, and we're going to use Keynote to build the wall. So we're going to start in Keynote, and we're going to actually use 3 shapes, and they're all going to be rectangular shapes, really basic. The first shape we're actually going to create is we're going to size it the entire size of the slide, the Keynote slide, and we're going to apply an image fill to it. Now it's got to be a Keynote shape, because what we're going to do is combine shapes together, and you can't do that with just an image on its own. So we're going to select the right setting to kind of fill it, and then we're actually just going to
get the idea, right? So, like, no one's going to come and show you how to do that in a session, but there's amazing stuff like this. It's available. It's only going to take 1 or 2 people to have a play and have a go at this. And before you know it, you will have people in the room that know exactly how to do this, and you can show everybody else. But that's just one app, AR Maker. There's lots like that you can just Google, go on YouTube and have a look, follow the people, and every time they put new tools out, you get to learn, you get to watch, pick up, and use in your own environments as well. It's worthwhile downloading, because to download it is free, but then you have to buy different books within it. But the one book that I'm going to show you, that's free. Okay. And what's powerful about this is that actually you interact with it through voice. Okay. So look, I've got a whole bunch of books here I can swipe. Okay, they're not very expensive, but still, you can get these. And if I just kind of go to this one and hit play, so you'll see how this works in a minute. Okay, so let's make it land on this. hello.
Hello, and welcome to Wondersland, a place where magical things happen when you read the word wonder out loud.
All I have to do is say wonder.
Exactly, just like that.
Okay, you get the idea, right? So that's where the story begins, and then different things happen, and I move out, and I've got to follow airplanes moving about, and it's a whole story. But for the next part, I have to speak. And if I say it correctly and pronounce it correctly, then he moves on to the next part. You know? So it's brilliant for little children, and the interactivity they get is pretty fantastic in terms of that experience. It's a big area. So we kind of lived half our lives, some of us, okay, in a non-digital world, non-social media world, and we're kind of used to that. We know what that feels like. But for children that have been brought up, and this is part of their social norm, not having likes, not being followed can affect, can have impact. And there's a huge amount of influence that can happen, that can affect the social and emotional well-being of children. And it's important for us as adults to be aware of that. And to be honest with you, whether you have iPads in your school or you don't have iPads in your school, it's actually got nothing to do with it, because we were just saying, it's children have mobile phones today and they have access. Okay? And through that, a lot of these things happen. But what this does allow us to do as adults, as teachers, as parents, is to be able to have conversations and to be aware and to look out for signs and to look out for things and so on, and be able to have conversations about it. You know, there's two other areas that I'm going to two segments that I'm going to speak about. One is screen time. Okay? So screen time is a big one. It's kind of, a lot of people talking about it and saying, hey, you know, what is too much screen time and so on. I was at a school that was launching a one-to-one program, and a lot of the parents were concerned about screen time. So we did a session with the parents, and we asked the parents to come to school, and I was going to run a session on screen time. So we titled it Screen Time, and quite a few parents, they turned up for the session and so on. When they got to the session, we then told them that we're going to talk about parent screen time before we speak about the children's screen time. I think that made everybody really feel uncomfortable. Because if now in this room, if I was to give you all a form, and you don't need to hand the form back in, you're going to keep this form for yourself, and on the form, there was a list on one side of things like WhatsApp, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and so on, and then you had to guess how much time you spend on each of those every day, right? How many people would be able to do that accurately? So we did that. Then what we did was we showed them on their devices where they could find the actual number. And that was really fascinating for them. I mean, there were people there that discovered that they're spending 4 hours on Instagram a day, just scrolling through. It never finishes, right? You just keep going and going and going. Okay? But there's no self-awareness of that. And when they could look at their times and so on, then they could repeat the same activity with their children. And only then you can begin to have a conversation of what is good, what is too much, what is not, and so on. Yeah. So I think to be able to have an informed conversation, first of all, you needed to have a foundation through which you're speaking through, rather than just saying, I think you're on it too much, and the children saying, I'm not on it so much. Or actually sometimes the children thinking, well, actually you're on your phone more than I am. Because that's a real thing that's happening. So where we have amazing new technology, new tools, and new things happening, but actually at the same time, there are also difficulties and new challenges that are presented And we've got to be able to face up to them. We've got to be able to look at them. We've got to be able to see what does that look like, what's the impact. So digital footprint is a good area to educate children on, because when children know that the future employers or their future employers will not just be looking at their application form, but they will also be looking at LinkedIn and their social media and so on. And that does influence employers' kind of ability to employ people. And you can have a positive impact on that, or you can have a negative impact on that. If you put good stuff out there, you can have positive impact. So it's possible to have a good digital feedback. And the Rishabh student in India, the one that's done, the 14 apps and so on, he's been taken on by Stanford purely because of his digital footprint. Yeah, it's an extreme example, but he's got 14 apps on the App Store. And they're actually being downloaded and they're being used. And he's not a company, he's just one kid. So there's some real potential, and based on that digital footprint, they're prepared to say, yeah, we definitely want this student in our university. So what I'm saying is that this area and these segments are really worthwhile exploring. I'm not saying as teachers we are already very busy people, we've got lots and lots on, we don't have enough time to do the things that we need to do, but to have awareness of this, I think, is the responsibility of a human being that lives in this century. Whether we are teachers or not, whether we are parents or not, it's kind of important. The difficulty is that there's nowhere we can go to learn about this. It's self-education. It's about reading about it. It's about being aware of this and so on. And it's being able to understand the kind of language that we need to be able to kind of have healthy discussions around this. So I think this is something that is definitely worthwhile looking at in many ways. We're looking at building consistency. So one of the hardest things to do with this is, okay, we think feedback is really good. How do I get the school, how do I get everybody on board? How do I get the teachers to actually do this and make this happen and be consistent about it? So one thing that I have kind of been working on really focuses on something called evidence-based consistency. So this is a model that I kind of put together from many different places. And it's focused on building evidence to show that this will make a difference. So it's not just, hey, I think this is good, let me just do it. It's based on data and information. So the first thing we look at is we define the operational efficiency. What is it? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? So if it's feedback, for example, and we're thinking, I need to improve feedback, and I want to look at this verbal thing, or I want to look at reducing photocopying, or I want to look at the flipped learning and recording my stuff and putting out. We've got to narrow the problem, and you've got to look at one thing, and you've got to kind of think about how we're going to solve that issue. So you define the issue, and in this case, let's use the example of feedback. Then what happens is you come up with ideation. So ideation is just getting a few people together and getting them to think of ideas that will solve that problem. Just blue sky thinking. So, maybe the app that I showed you, that might be something. Maybe if you use OneNote, Microsoft stuff, that might be something. You might look at case studies. You might even look at things that are non-technological as well. Okay? So you can go and look at whatever you want. The important thing is, first of all, set a time limit. Say we're gonna go and do research for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then we'll come back again. And the other thing to do is that make sure whatever you look at, make sure it's simple and reliable. Because if it's complicated, no one's gonna do it. So when you come back with some ideas, what then happens is we then begin to kind of prototype it. So we bring the ideas back, and then we have a go at practicing what the idea is about in your school or in your context. Because some ideas may not work in a Swedish context, some tools may not work when everybody's using it, I don't know, it might be to do with network issues or anything, the idea is you prototype and you test the model, you make sure that is it working or is it not. And from there, you then have a discussion and you narrow it down to one or two that you feel are actually quite effective and you want to test for a longer period of time. So then what you do is you then share the idea with other teachers as well, but you run it for a period of time, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, but you collect data. So for example, if it's feedback, you might have a document that collects how many hours is it taking teachers to give feedback verbally over a period of 8 weeks. And you might do that with 4 or 5 teachers. And then you compare that with other teachers, what they were doing before, and how long was that. So you're actually collecting information. If you find that the new way of doing something is much better than what you were doing before, and it is saving you time, and the students like it, and it's having more impact, then you consider turning it into what we call a non-negotiable. So this is not something that the principal has said, hey, everybody's got to do this. This is something that as a collective, you've come to the decision that this is a much better way of doing something, so therefore this is a non-negotiable. It might not be perfect, but it's definitely better than what we've been doing, then it's a step forward. And then whatever the faults are, we try and solve those and we try and work those out and so on. Okay? But the idea is, through non-negotiables, you end up building consistency and you end up building culture. Okay? And that culture thing is really important because when new teachers come in, it's easy for them to understand what is it that this school is doing that's different. What is the digital process of feedback and how does that work and so on. So it's easy for people to kind of move into that environment. And when it becomes a non-negotiable, you then end up with consistency. Lots of people are actually doing this and everyone's doing this across the school. The expectations of the children change because they know that this is the normal way in which we do things in a school. The expectations of parents change because they will say, well, this is fantastic, I get to hear what the teacher's saying and so on. So the idea of non-negotiables is actually quite powerful. But it does mean that you're doing it because of reasons you've tested it. And it may be that when you get to the prototype stage, or when you get to the test stage, it doesn't work. Or it's not as good as it was before. In which case, you haven't made the whole change and it's failed. You've tested it. And you've measured it with a smaller group, and then you've been able to kind of create that change. So that in itself is kind of the approach that we've taken in a number of schools that I've been kind of working with. Yeah? So the school in India, we did the same thing. You know, we identified people, we then worked with them, and then we kind of built up this evidence-based consistency. And then even when parents were to come in and parents were asking, well, why have you made this change and what is it? We were able to say, well, actually we're seeing, you know, the impact of data. We're seeing reduced workload. We're seeing teachers save 3-4 hours a week, you know, and that means that's 3-4 hours a week that, you know, that the teachers are gaining and so on. So we were able to kind of give data and information in this way that was actually quite powerful for us. I think overall, it's an interesting kind of journey. It's not one that kind of stops, it's one that continues. I will say that on my travels and when I've been to, you know, the different places around the world, yes, you know, countries like the Nordics, the UK, even US and Canada, we kind of see the idea of one-to-one schools and students having computers. You can find lots of schools, so that's not a big surprise. I think the difficulty is that quite often the devices are given out, but nobody's really thought about what's going to change in the classroom. So the example that I give, I say that for me it's like taps, you know. Taps are shiny and they're very easy to use. You turn it on and water comes out. If you see a tap, you expect water to come out. And I think sometimes what's happened in education is, as educators, We think if we give technology, we expect kind of good things to happen. But the water doesn't come from the tap. It comes from all the plumbing that's behind it. Yeah, and the plumbing is the hard work. The tap is just the nice thing that you see at the end. Okay? So quite often what I find is that we give taps out, we give technology out, but we've not really thought about the plumbing. And the plumbing is the critical thinking, is the communication and creation, it's the authenticity of learning. It's kind of re-looking at our approaches to learning and then rethinking that approach. So that plumbing needs the verbal feedback, all of that adds to the plumbing. So if the quality of plumbing is good, hey, then we get water coming out. And I know you've got bacteria in your water at the moment. But that's not the point. Okay? Maldives, Mauritius, these are middle-income countries. They rely on the ability of technology to amplify their presence. Yeah? There are people that can work in multiple countries from one location. They rely on their ability to collaborate and connect. Their education system builds that in. And it's really important that we are teaching our children those skill sets as well. The other thing is also kind of interesting. So countries like Singapore, they're about to they've just announced a skills-based system rather than kind of testing and just looking at results and so on. So that there's a big shift happening there. And also, I think from next year, every student will have their own device. So that will be quite interesting, in terms of what device they're using and how they're using it and so on. So we are seeing a shift that's happening in the world, and I think that the ability for children to be able to use these tools effectively become kind of quite powerful. So look, kind of coming up to time. If I was to kind of summarize in some way and to kind of talk you, and it's not a straight journey. It's very bumpy. Okay. So what I've tried to do here is the colored circles are the reasons why we're doing this. Why is it important? And the gray circles are your kind of bumpy roads, the things that sometimes get you down, things that don't work, and so on. So for me, the biggest thing is around the moral imperative. Okay? And what I mean by the moral imperative goes back right at the beginning of today when I talked about the students that were living in the red part of town that live 8 years less. So the education provides social mobility, which will allow those children to come out of that. And for me, that's quite key. So there's a real moral need to make that happen, which is a big driving factor. There is belief in what we do. What we're doing it, for the right reason. It's that kind of development, it's the growth and so on. And also, I feel intelligence is not fixed. So you can't have one way of teaching something and all the students will understand, because every student is different. And I think one thing that technology does do is it provides the different pathways for each child to learn in the way in which they need to learn. And they can access things and go back to things and look up things. And they've got access to knowledge. Knowledge is important. They still need to learn things and understand things, and that's quite key. But everybody will do that in different ways. So, that intelligence is not fixed. Just because I teach mathematics in one way, maybe 80% of the class will understand it, but 20% of the class might not. Because it doesn't mean that they don't understand mathematics, it just means they need to learn in a different way. So the ability for them to find that different way and to have the tools to allow for that to happen is really quite key. I also believe in this idea of access. So access, like I've just explained, is not just the taps, it's the plumbing as well. That's really important. So, students should be able to have access to learning and knowledge and so on. And of course, things need to be personalized, and there's a huge community impact that can happen around that as well. I think success is probably one of the most dangerous parts. Because when you get a bit of success, sometimes you feel like we've done it. And then we stop. And then nothing happens. Really, when we get success, that's version 1.0. Okay? It's then that we have to ask ourselves, okay, that's great, and it's brilliant, and we celebrate that success, but actually, what can I do now that I wasn't able to do in the past? You know, you then begin to kind of have that as the next question, and you begin to think about what are the next possibilities. Because even some of the things that I've shown you today, AR Maker, Wonderscope, and things like this, yeah, these tools, like 1 year ago, they didn't exist. And I'll probably tell you now that this time next year there will be other tools that didn't exist now, and we'll be rethinking, okay, what can we do now with this? So our tools keep changing, which means that we need to keep asking ourselves that question. And of course, we will get challenges. So one of my biggest challenges when we first started off with the iPod Touch project was old buildings. Our buildings were falling apart. You know, we had big challenges around change. The school that I was in was a school that was running for 50 years. Nothing had changed. So to try and change that environment is very hard. Because you're not just changing people, you're changing their mindsets and you're changing their beliefs. Yeah. So that's hard to do. And it takes time. And it's done through encouragement and it's done through sharing. Sharing good stuff that's going on. Sharing success stories. Sharing impact stuff from children. You know? And when you begin to share that and people begin to see that, you then, you know, that then begins to change the mind. I had one colleague who was in that school, and he's a maths teacher, brilliant maths teacher, and he always disagreed with me on the use of technology for learning and education. His feeling was that I could just have a piece of chalk and I'll get all the results that I need to get for the children. So we always used to have this disagreement. Probably since we started the project in 2008, so over 10 years. Last year, and you know, his thinking was the children will just play games and they won't be concentrating and they won't use it to learn and so on. Last year, was it last year? No, it was at the beginning of this year. Because I left the school a few years ago. I suddenly got a message from him and it said, "You were right." So obviously I thought he sent this to the wrong person, so I texted him back and said to him, "I think you sent this to the wrong person." And he said, "No," he said, "I meant you were right about the iPads." So then I called him and I said, "We argued this for 10 years, what's changed your mind? I really want to know." Anyway, we met up, and what he said to me was that he ended up, his daughter started school, and at that school she got given an iPad. And when she came home, you know, she was then watching tutorial videos on math. So I didn't understand what the teacher had said, so I'm just looking it up. I'm going to find another way. This other guy, he teaches in another school, but he puts videos, and I like listening to him, so I'm just going to learn it from him. You know, and he was just kind of, sure. And then I need to ask this teacher this question, and I need to just look at this and do this, and suddenly that changed his belief. You know, because it had impact. So it's not always the case that everybody will be on board. That doesn't always happen. But actually, it's possible to get a critical mass of people. And people will come in their own ways when they see good things happening. That then convinces them to say, well, actually, maybe there is something in this. Maybe there is something that we do need to look at. So anyway, that's the journey, and it's hard. And I think when we begin to ask the question where we think, okay, we've had some success, and we start asking ourselves, what can we do now that we couldn't do before? That's when we kind of realize that we just started. Yeah, so I could actually take you to schools that are doing voice feedback, they're doing this, that, and everything, but actually they just feel, oh, we're just getting started. You know, there's so much more that we can do. We don't know enough about this, and we don't know enough about this, and we need to learn about this, and so on. And I think that's a good place to be, because it's a continuous journey. You're familiar with Apple Teacher, the program? Yeah? So now there are schools that have got students to do Apple Teacher. And then the students are running classes for the teachers. So if you don't know about something, you can go and see that. You can ask the students and they will go and find out, and then they will give you a 30-minute session on that particular tool and how to use it and what you do and so on. So I think the world is a changing place. I think that we share things, we grow with things. I think that we can kind of learn new things as well, and I think it's just a continual learning journey. I think the best teachers are learners, and I think that we now live in a world where we've got an opportunity where that really doesn't stop. So